I was scared of dying because it just looked so bad outside.
Christina Taft made a choice the day Paradise burned down. Her choice saved her life, and yet she regrets it.
I just wish I had done something different. I think about it every day, wishing I could just, reverse it all and do something different.
Christina chose to run, even though she couldn't convince her mom to leave the house with her.
Closed the door and I drove down, so then I had the things in my car and the car and not my mom. So it really hurts. It's like, why didn't she get in? And why didn't I stay longer?
After she escaped, Christina tried to get someone to go to the house to help Vicky, to help save her mom. She kept calling 911.
They told me they weren't getting anyone who couldn't get out themselves, and that really shocked me and upset me. I was like, oh no, my mom's gonna die now.
Is Mom alive? Christina could only wonder while the sky grew blacker. The campfire consumed the whole town between breakfast and dinner time. 66-year-old Vicky Taft became another face on the list of hundreds missing. Christina's mind kept going back to the choices. Her own choice to leave, her mom's choice to stay.
I don't know, we were fighting, so it was a really bad way to leave it too, like mean and harsh. I didn't want to die, and she wasn't going to listen to me maybe. And
Christina spent a long time trying.
for a whole hour, there was a lot being said.
She loaded their things into the car and pleaded with her mom to just get in.
So I think she was waiting for an authority.
The authorities had decided already, but Christina and Vicky didn't know that. The entire hour they spent fighting about whether to leave, their house was already under a mandatory evacuation order. The order never reached them, and they weren't the only ones.
Feather River Hospital, we've got 4 people trapped. An elderly female that's in assistance exiting the residence. As intermediate, there's 60 staff and students trying to evacuate. Can't get out. It's surrounded by fires and right there. Basically everywhere. Go away. And burn victims there. Woman in labor. She's at base on a pilot. She can speak one of her duties. Get out of the roadway. We have eyes on the vegetation fire. It's going to be very difficult access. Camp Creek Road is nearly inaccessible.
The fire started just before sunrise in a canyon about 8 miles from Paradise. They called it the campfire because it started on Camp Creek Road, a scraggly dirt service road beneath the high-tension power lines that wasn't much use to fire crews. They couldn't get to the first flames in time to put them out. It was 10 acres and growing fast. Right away, they knew this one could be big.
This has got potential for a major incident, and it's got a really good wind on it, critical rate of spread.
To begin to grasp why it killed so many people, you need to understand that the campfire wasn't just a bad fire. It was a perfect fire storm.
Engine 2161, DCSO is inquiring if the evacuations for the Polga area can be considered mandatory, and if there's anywhere else you would like to extend that to.
So let's make it mandatory for Polga with them being ready at a moment's notice for the rest of the community.
It was an oh-shit feeling, because you see fire when it gets established in the canyon. It's notorious for large fires and gobbling firefighters up just due to the limited access and the really steep terrain that goes on in there.
Leland Ratcliffe was in his truck, headed down the hill to his job as a firefighter with the Feather River Hotshots. He saw the column of smoke in his rearview mirror. It was blowing sideways. He called a friend from his team who also lives in Paradise.
He said, hey, you see the column that's coming out of the canyon and where it's heading? And he was right behind me, and he says, oh, the same thing. He says it's going right for Paradise.
Mandatory evacuations, everything east of Pence Road in Paradise.
You could tell probably by 7:30, by the time I got to work, it was probably 5,000, 10,000 acres at that point, which is unheard of. Just a rapid rate of spread.
It was heading right for town, toward his kids and his wife. He called her.
I said, go get the kids from school and get home get the cats, get the dogs, and get the hell out of there. She went to school, and at this point, the school was still accepting late arrivals because they hadn't gotten any kind of word to evacuate, and they just hadn't gotten any word that the fire was going to be this bad.
He wasn't being paranoid. Leland's training and experience told him exactly what that black column of smoke was doing as it blew sideways. It was spreading the fire, full of hot embers. You
can't start a fire faster than that. You know, starting it at the base of a dry hill on a really high wind that's blowing it up the hill, that's the fastest fire is going to move, right? And at the top of the hill, that wind is catching the embers off the trees and just throwing them out miles ahead of the fire.
Those embers rained down on every part of Paradise. Fire crews couldn't steer the campfire, much less head it off, because it wasn't a wall of flames. It was a windstorm full of sparks, flying right over their heads, lighting a million spot fires. Rescuers started to get calls from people who couldn't escape.
Camp IC report of a possible entrapment. RP advising they cannot evacuate due to fire. All units, be advised, the town of Paradise is under a mandatory evacuation. The town of Paradise is under a mandatory evacuation.
So at that point, it's really starting to be impending doom.
Leland's hotshot crew didn't wait to be called. They loaded up and headed to the fire, deciding the best they could do was to go door to door to warn people. They swung by Leland's house near Clark Road and Pearson.
My wife is still here, and I said, well, what the hell are you still doing here? At that point, she was hopping in the car and they took off. So they got out of here before any of the mass chaos, panic had happened. They got down the hill, luckily, in plenty of time. It was about 8:30 at that point.
And it was only until 8:30 that the neighbor knocked.
The neighbor had heard about a fire, but there was only a light smell of smoke in the air.
I just kind of took a shower and got ready and then started seriously packing, seeing the cars outside starting to back up. And my mom was making phone calls, lightly packing, sort of, but kind of thinking it would just be fine. And
Christina started to hurry, but says her mom Vicky seemed less concerned. Vicky even paid the phone bill. She spent the morning calling friends in town. None of them were evacuating. That's when Christina and Vicky Taft started fighting about whether to leave. They couldn't see the flames at this point, but the smoke was getting thicker. They hadn't been told they needed to evacuate. A lot of people hadn't.
Yeah, they expected that authority would tell them, like every other fire that we had, we were told.
If you weren't actually there, you might argue this is where common sense should kick in. In fact, that's the argument Christina was making to her mom. But it's not that simple. By staying put, her mom was doing exactly what local emergency planners spent the last decade trying to convince everyone to do: wait for their zone to be called. It was a good plan for most fires, but not this one. What Paradise needed in this fire was to evacuate everybody at once. Back when county and town leaders wrote the evacuation plan, you can hear what they thought about that.
We learned not to evacuate everybody at once.
They'd learned not to evacuate everybody at once. And this wasn't just one town councilman's opinion. This was accepted wisdom, a lesson learned from the Humboldt fire in 2008. When thousands of people all tried to get out of town at the same time, the roads jammed up. So the community improved its roads. They made a plan to reverse the direction of lanes to get more people down in bad fires. And they also split all the neighborhoods into zones. Paradise had 14 evacuation zones, along with a bunch more for the neighborhoods outside the town limits. The idea was to evacuate only those who needed to escape and keep the roads flowing.
So there wasn't a whole town evacuation plan?
There was never a whole town evacuation plan.
Paradise Town Councilman Mike Zuccolillo says he jumped in to help direct traffic. The evacuation plans didn't cover this. He wasn't sure what to do.
Do we try to hold up the traffic to get the fire truck up, or do we let the fire trucks hold and just keep running the traffic down the hill? You were making decisions right on the spot because there was no, the plan was out the window at that point. The plan was get as many people as we can get off this hill as quickly as possible.
The plan may have been out the window, but the go when your zone is called mentality was already baked into the culture here. On the emergency traffic plan, goal number one was to, quote, prevent people from entering the evacuation area and becoming an additional burden upon the road system. The evacuation pamphlet warned people to know your zone, and if you are not within the immediate hazard area and not directed to evacuate by public officials, remain at your location and shelter in place. They did.
A lot of people probably figured they could shelter in place because there was never a concept of everything burning. I think if unfortunately a lot of the people that passed in their homes, if they had received notice that you were going to burn to death, people may have tried differently.
And it kept getting darker outside. And I was just like, we were fighting, and I even said, I'm leaving, and she said, leave.
Her mom wouldn't budge, and Christina felt her life was in danger. It was.
I tried and it didn't work. I mean, I did try, I don't know, didn't make the right decision either, and she didn't either, and the response was so bad, and I tried with that, and it didn't work either, and
1 week after the fire, Christina got word that crews found human remains in the house. She gave a DNA sample. Another week later, on Thanksgiving morning, she got the phone call. The body was her mom's. Vicky died in her living room as fire consumed the house.
she didn't want to die, and I knew it was bad. She didn't realize it was going to be bad. She was hiding in her house. I had said she'd probably be alive now.
The rescuers working that day didn't want Vicky to die in her house. In fact, before Christina left at 10 a.m., we know they issued at least 3 evacuation orders that included the Taft house. The first was almost 2 hours before Christina left. That radio call out to fire crews.
All units, be advised, the town of Paradise is under a mandatory evacuation.
Despite that order to the entire town, the Butte County Sheriff's Office issued another order for only 4 zones, including the one where the Tafts lived. That was at 8:32. Then again at 9:04 on the radio.
Mandatory evacuations to all of Paradise.
The Sheriff's Office also used social media. We showed Christina a tweet with the order to evacuate her zone, issued almost an hour and a half before she decided to leave. The order she thinks her mom was waiting for.
It really hurts that they put this out here and they wouldn't tell us.
An order unheard is as good as no order at all, and none of the evacuation orders ever reached the Tafts.
So you got no phone call?
No.
You got no alert on your cell phone?
No.
No one knocked on your door?
No.
We heard this over and over from survivors of this fire. They got no warning at all. Some people died in their cars trying to evacuate, but most died outside running for their lives or in their homes, like Vicky Taft did. 2/3 of the dead were found inside houses. Leland, the hotshot, saw a lot of people who didn't know to evacuate until the embers started falling.
Grandmas on the side of the road that were just, barely able to make it up the side of the road. 15-year-old kids that didn't know where to go, just started throwing people in the truck.
Masses of people didn't know to go for a couple of reasons. First, there simply weren't enough rescuers in Paradise that morning to go to every street to warn people. Second, our investigation found that rescuers did not use all of the mass notification systems they had, and the one system they did use failed to reach a lot of people. The county used a service called Code Red. Code Red is a robocall alert system. You're supposed to sign up in advance to get the alerts. Mike Zuccolillo, the town councilman, says only about 1 in 8 people told them they got a mass notification that day. He was signed up for Code Red.
Did you get notified at all?
No.
You didn't get a notification?
No.
A review of the call logs from that day shows the Code Red alerts couldn't keep up with the fire. The phone lines can only handle so many calls at once. At a time when seconds mattered, it took the system 16 minutes to call the phone numbers for the first evacuation zones in Paradise. The system failed to reach almost 1/3 of those numbers, a rate that would get worse as utility lines burned up. But even in this first round of Code Red alerts, 1,604 phone lines that were signed up were never reached. There are 2 federal alert systems that could have been used to reach people even if they'd never signed up, but responders never used those. EAS, the emergency alert system, could have sent out warnings on TV and radio stations all over Butte County, and the wireless emergency alert system, or WEA, could have pushed a warning to cell phones in the area. Both systems are run by FEMA, which told us no alerts were ordered at all from California that day. Rescuers gave the order to abandon ship, but they never used the biggest bullhorn they had to tell people.
People are dying, like literally, and they think the whole city is going to go, and then they're just not even paying attention, like sounding alarms or anything.
Do you think that we need to take a second look at why WEA and the broadcast alerts weren't implemented?
Yeah, I think it's certainly worth taking a look at it. It was we were working the plan that we had, and again, I think that we saved tens of thousands of people with that. Whether or not that would have made a difference, because it comes back to whether or not you have the phone on, whether or not you have cell service.
Sheriff Corey Honey joined crews on the ground to help that day. He told us he's not sure there was ever a conscious decision not to use the wireless and broadcast alerts. He says the fire simply overwhelmed rescuers.
And I would submit to you that there's probably not a single jurisdiction in California, or for that matter, probably in this country, that has the capacity to evacuate the entire population at one time so quickly.
Still, he acknowledges the warnings didn't reach everyone who needed them, which means everyone here will have to live with an uncomfortable question. If there were a plan for the worst possible firestorm, how many of our friends and neighbors could have been saved?
No one ever came to us and said, you know what, you could have a town-wide evacuation and you could lose everything in town. No one ever told us that.
Fire scientists are surprised at the high death toll of this fire, but they've worried for some time that a fire just like this one could burn an entire town down. And the danger gets worse each year.
There are hundreds of towns in the Sierra Nevada that are in areas that are, realistically just as risky fire-wise as the situation was in Paradise. And there's some dice being rolled.
If there's one takeaway you could tell the 100 other foothill towns that could be in the same danger as you,
it can happen. I mean, to date, this is the worst tragedy that's ever happened. I hope I'm the last person that says that. I hope there's not another town.
Paradise had its own vulnerabilities. 1 in 5 people had a disability there. 1 in 4 were over 65, rates much higher than the state average. In hindsight, leaders are looking at warning options that they didn't have before.
Air raid horns, similar they do like tornado horns.
Yeah.
Maybe that's more of a concept up here because, we did have a more elderly population.
And I think that's something that going forward would be a good idea. The one problem that you have to consider, because we've thought a lot about this.
People need to know what it means.
They need to know what it means. Because at 3 o'clock in the morning when the air raid siren goes off, well, what does that mean?
It's just one example of the things Paradise and communities like it might consider as they look at how to plan for the next perfect storm. We can't prevent every fire. Sparks happen, but no one thinks a spark should kill this many people.
It's wrong. It was up to me to help her, and I didn't. I left earlier. I have to live with that decision forever.
Christina Taft carries a heavy burden. She calls herself a coward for not waiting longer. That's not really fair when you consider the fact that some people burned in their cars trying to escape down the wrong road at the wrong time. But the heart can't always be comforted by things the brain knows. There is some comfort, though, in an honest conversation about why this fire took the lives it did.
If there's some kind of change, I feel like that would help too, so it didn't keep happening. Something good so my mom didn't die in vain.
If enough people get that message, maybe the Camp Fire will remain the deadliest fire in California history forever. At least, That's the hope.